For over 50 years, the United States government looked the American people in the eye and said, Area 51 does not exist. Not classified, not restricted, not secret, does not exist. And for 50 years, millions of Americans looked back at the unmarked planes flying in from Las Vegas, the armed guards patrolling a fence in the middle of the Nevada desert, the signs that said, U.S. of deadly force authorized, and said, sure, okay, nothing there. Then in 2013, the government blinked. They finally admitted Area 51 is real, and what they admitted was hiding is so extraordinary, so genuinely mind-bending, that the truth turned out to be more impressive than the aliens everyone assumed were inside. But here's the part of the story nobody tells you. Even after the admission, even after the declassified files, even in 2026 with new UAP disclosures coming out of Washington, there are still things at Area 51 we do not know. And what we do know raises questions the government has never fully answered. This is Hidden America TV. Let's go inside Area 51. Segment 1. What and where? First, let's establish what Area 51 actually is. Officially, it is a highly classified United States Air Force installation located at a dry lake bed called Groom Lake in the southern Nevada desert. It sits roughly 83 miles northwest of Las Vegas, inside a restricted airspace zone 23 miles wide and 25 miles long, known as the Groom Box. The base is completely surrounded by sensors, cameras, and armed security. Signs along its perimeter warn that photography is prohibited and that deadly force is authorized. You cannot fly over it. You cannot drive near it. Satellite images of it on Google Earth were blurred for years by government request. For decades, maps simply didn't show it. But here's what's happening right now in 2026. Every morning, a fleet of unmarked white Boeing 737s departs from a classified terminal at Harry Reid International Airport in Las Vegas. The planes have no airline markings. The only identifying feature is a single red stripe. They are known informally as the Janet flights. Janet being the call sign used by air traffic control. The pilots require top-secret security clearances. The passengers, engineers, scientists, technicians, sign non-disclosure agreements covering everything they see, hear, and do. They fly to Groom Lake, they work a shift, they fly home, and they never talk about it. That is still happening today. Whatever is being built or tested at Area 51 in 2026, we will not know about it for decades. Segment 2. Why it was built to understand Area 51. You have to go back to 1955. The Cold War is at its most dangerous. The Soviet Union has nuclear weapons. American military commanders desperately need to know what the Soviets are building and where. But they have a problem. You cannot send a spy plane over Soviet territory at normal altitude. Soviet radar would detect it. Soviet fighters would shoot it down. The CIA needed a plane that could fly so high, so far beyond the reach of any Soviet missile or fighter jet, that it was effectively invisible. They called the project Aquatone, and they chose a remote airfield at a dry lake bed in Nevada to build and test it in total secrecy. The airfield had been used briefly during World War II and then abandoned. It was surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, invisible from any road, undetectable from any civilian flight path. President Eisenhower personally authorized the construction of the facility. He called it, internally, Paradise Ranch. A joke, because it was anything but paradise. The facility workers called it by its designation on the Atomic Energy Commission map. Area 51, the name stuck, and what they built there was the most revolutionary aircraft in human history. Segment 3, the U-2 and the UFO wave. The aircraft they built at Area 51 was the U-2, and it did something no aircraft had ever done before. It flew at 70,000 feet. To put that in perspective, in the mid-1950s, commercial airliners flew at 10,000 miles to 20,000 feet. Military jets flew up to 40,000 feet. The U-2 flew at 70,000 feet, 13 miles above the Earth, at the edge of the stratosphere. The Soviets couldn't touch it. Their radar could barely track it. Their missiles couldn't reach it. The U-2 flew over the Soviet Union, photographing military installations, missile sites, and weapons facilities for years, without the Soviets being able to do anything about it. But here on the ground in America, something unexpected was happening. Airline pilots flying west in the early evenings would look up through their cockpit windows and see something impossible. A silver, gleaming object, moving impossibly fast, at an altitude no aircraft was supposed to reach. Catching the last light of the setting sun while the ground below was already dark. It looked like nothing any of them had ever seen, so they reported it as UFOs. The CIA's own declassified study, released years later, admitted that more than half of all UFO sighting reports filed in the United States during the late 1950s and 1960s were caused by U-2 flights. Think about that for a moment. The great UFO wave of the 1950s, the flying saucers, the glowing objects, the impossible aircraft that no one could explain, was mostly just the United States government's own spy planes, doing exactly what they were designed to do, being seen but not recognized by the people below. Segment 4, Gary Powers and the Lie. But for 5 years, the U-2 program was America's greatest secret success. Then, May 1st, 1960, a U-2 piloted by CIA officer Francis Gary Powers was shot down over Soviet territory, not by a fighter jet. The Soviets had finally developed a surface-to-air missile, the SA-2, that could reach 70,000 feet. The plane was hit, Powers ejected. He survived and was captured. Now the U.S. government had a crisis. Powers and his plane were missing over Soviet territory. The Soviets knew what had happened, but the Americans didn't know that the Soviets knew. So they did what they always did. They lied. NASA released a statement claiming a weather research plane had gone off course over the Soviet Union when the pilot passed out from oxygen deprivation. It was a complete fabrication. Then Soviet Premier Khrushchev stood up at the United Nations and produced the wreckage of the U-2, and produced Francis Gary Powers, alive, on camera, having confessed to spying. The cover story collapsed instantly. Eisenhower was humiliated on the world stage. A planned summit between the U.S. and Soviet Union was canceled. The incident set in motion a catastrophic breakdown in U.S.-Soviet relations, a chain of mistrust that contributed directly to the Cuban Missile Crisis 2 years later. All because the government's first instinct, even when caught red-handed, was to lie. The same instinct that kept Area 51 officially non-existent for 50 more years. Segment 5. The aircraft that came after the U-2, Area 51, kept building. And what came next was even more extraordinary. The A-12 ox cart, built between 1958 and 1962. The A-12 was a reconnaissance aircraft that could fly at Mach 3.2, 3 times the speed of sound. When civilian pilots or motorists saw it, they didn't report a fast plane. They reported a UFO because its body was so wide and disc-shaped, so unlike any aircraft anyone had ever seen, that the human brain simply could not categorize it correctly. The CIA's own veterans of the ox cart program later said they believed the unusual shape of their aircraft was directly responsible for some of the most famous UFO reports of the era. Then came the SR-71 Blackbird. Still, to this day, the fastest air-breathing aircraft ever built. Mach 3.3, altitude 85,000 feet. If a surface-to-air missile was fired at an SR-71, the pilot's standard response was simply to accelerate. The missile could not catch it. And then in the 1970s and 80s came the project that would change warfare forever. The F-117 Nighthawk, the world's first operational stealth aircraft, designed to be invisible to radar. Its angular, faceted surfaces scattered radar waves in every direction, so that the aircraft's radar cross-section was roughly the size of a golf ball. An aircraft the size of a fighter jet, invisible to radar. When test pilots flew it over Nevada at night, witnesses on the ground saw triangular shapes moving silently through the sky with no sound, no lights, and no radar signature. The UFO reports came flooding in, every single one of them was the F-117. Segment 6. Bob Lazar and the Alien Theory. In 1989, a man named Bob Lazar sat down for a television interview in Las Vegas and said something that changed the UFO conversation forever. He claimed he had worked at a facility called S4, located underground inside a mountain range near Area 51. He said the U.S. government had in its possession 9 alien spacecraft. He said he had personally worked on reverse engineering the propulsion system of one of those craft. He described an element, Element 115, that he said powered the craft using a gravity wave generator that human science didn't yet understand. The interview went worldwide. Lazar became the most famous UFO whistleblower in history, and here is where the story gets complicated. In 2003, 14 years after Lazar's interview, Element 115 was officially synthesized by scientists in Russia and confirmed by the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. It is now called moscovium. Lazar had named a real element that science did not yet officially recognize in 1989. He also described employment records and security clearances that the government aggressively denied, but has never fully and transparently disproved. The declassified record contains no evidence supporting Lazar's specific claims. No alien craft, no S4 facility, no reverse engineering program. But the declassified record also cannot account for everything that happened at Area 51. And Bob Lazar, now in his 60s, has never changed a single detail of his story. Make of that what you will. Segment 7, 2026. What we still don't know. Here's where we are in 2026. The government admitted Area 51 exists in 2013, 58 years after it was built. The declassified files confirmed the U-2, the A-12, the SR-71, the F-117, all real, all extraordinary, all explained. The CIA admitted that more than half the UFO reports of the 1950s and 60s were caused by their own aircraft. The government's 2024 ARO historical report concluded there is no verified evidence of recovered non-human technology in U.S. possession. So, is it all explained? Not quite. In late April 2026, a swarm of more than a dozen earthquakes was recorded near Area 51, the strongest measured at magnitude 4.4. There is no public evidence linking these earthquakes to weapons testing. But Area 51 sits adjacent to the Nevada National Security Site, where the United States conducted 928 nuclear tests between 1951 and 1992. Meanwhile, new UAP files released under the 2026 Pursue program include military pilot reports describing objects performing maneuvers that the declassified aircraft programs cannot explain. Objects entering and exiting the ocean at impossible speeds. Craft with no heat signature performing instant direction changes at velocities that would kill any human pilot. The ARO says these cases are still open, and whatever is being tested at Groom Lake today, whatever those Janet Airlines passengers are building in the Nevada desert right now, won't be declassified for another 20 or 30 years. Which means somewhere in America today, there is a civilian watching the sky over Nevada, seeing something they cannot explain. And in 30 years, we'll find out it was just another classified aircraft. Probably. Conclusion. Area 51 taught America something important. The truth when it finally came out, was not a disappointment. The real story of Area 51 is not aliens. It's something stranger and more impressive. It's human beings in the Nevada desert, building aircraft so advanced that their own citizens couldn't believe they were real. Aircraft that flew at the edge of space, aircraft that outran missiles, aircraft invisible to radar, all while the government looked at the people reporting them and said, "You're imagining things. That's not aliens. That's ambition. That's engineering." That's what happens when America decides to build something that doesn't exist yet and refuses to stop until it does. But here's what keeps this story alive in 2026. The pattern has repeated itself too many times to ignore. Every generation, the government denies. Every generation, the truth eventually comes out. Every generation, the truth turns out to be something more impressive than the denial. So the question isn't whether Area 51 has secrets left. Of course it does. The question is, what will we find out in 30 years that's happening there right now? I'm Hidden America TV. Horkascoe. What do you think is still hidden at Area 51? Aliens, advanced aircraft, or something else entirely? Drop your theory in the comments. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you in the next hidden story.